Have you ever just looked around and wondered, how is everyone else managing to afford their life right now? You probably don't like it when people tell you the hard truth. Bye. Okay. Lavish getaways, high-end fashion, those perfect dream homes, it seems like everyone, even people your own age or younger, are living in a totally different reality. It feels like no matter how hard you work, how much you save, or how responsible you are with your money, you're just constantly falling behind. So you pick up your phone, you scroll through your feed, and you see friends buying houses, jetting off to Europe, dining at places that charge $12 for a bottle of sparkling water, and they're all smiling. They're still spending, they're still traveling, and you're just sitting there, staring at your credit card statement, wondering how groceries got this expensive, why your rent was hiked up again, and how on earth anyone is buying a house in this economy. But here's the reality. It's not just you. Millions and millions of people feel this exact same way. Over 55% of millennials say they are living paycheck to paycheck. That's an enormous number of people. And it's not only millennials. Right now, household debt in America has hit a record-breaking $18.2 trillion. That figure shot up by $170 billion in just the last 3 months alone. Credit card debt by itself has soared past $1.3 trillion, and delinquencies, that's when people can't make their payments, are also climbing at a frightening pace. And yet the illusion persists that everyone else is doing just fine. Why is that? Because right now, interest rates are at their highest point in decades. The average credit card APR is now over 24%. That is also the highest it has ever been. And despite this, people are still borrowing more and more just to keep up appearances. And this is especially true when you look online. Social media has magnified this illusion to extreme levels. About 7 in 10 millennials admit to feeling financial FOMO, the fear of missing out, because of what they see on their feeds. And even though the net worth of millennials has technically increased since 2019, experts are calling this phantom wealth. People say that while their net worth might be higher on paper, they certainly don't feel any wealthier. Multiple studies have shown that high social media use is directly linked to anxiety, depression, and a lower sense of financial self-worth, even when a person's actual financial situation hasn't changed at all. And nowhere is this disconnect more obvious than in the housing market. In the 1990s, for instance, the average first-time homebuyer was just 28 years old. Today, that number has jumped to 38 years old, a full decade later. And it's not just the age. The actual number of first-time buyers has plummeted. Right now, they make up only 24% of the market, which is the lowest that figure has been in over 40 years. So today, I'm going to pull back the curtain on the reality of why we all feel this way. I want to help explain the real forces behind the debt, the interest rates, the housing crisis, the spending habits, and the social media machine that is engineered to make everyone feel poorer than they actually are. Because here's the truth. You are probably doing a lot better than you give yourself credit for. You're just comparing your real life to someone else's perfectly curated illusion. I'm going to show you the truth behind the magic. So with that said, let's dive in. Hi, I'm your name. I hope you're having a great day. Come for the financial insights and stay for the magic of realizing that not everything is as it seems. Because behind the curtain, most people are juggling debt and anxiety, while on the outside, we're all still posting, flexing, and pretending. So let me start by exposing the biggest lie in all of this, which is of course social media. Over 90% of young adults use social media platforms every single day, and more than half of them check their feeds over 30 times a week. And this is about more than just curing boredom, because it fundamentally changes how we perceive our own lives. Studies reveal that 41% of millennials admit to buying things just to keep up with their peers, and almost 30% go into debt because of that social pressure. One of the key drivers for this, according to researchers, is FOMO. It might sound a bit silly, but it is a very real psychological phenomenon. Around 69% of millennials regularly experience a financial fear of missing out. But it isn't just limited to them. Gen Z reports even higher levels of this anxiety. Roughly 70% of Gen Z say they feel financially inadequate simply because of what they see online. This phenomenon even has a name: money dysmorphia. Approximately 43% of Gen Z and 41% of millennials say their perception of their own financial health is distorted, even when the actual numbers tell a very different and often more positive story. And platforms like TikTok are not helping. Over 50% of TikTok users say they're more likely to buy a product after seeing it recommended by a creator. In fact, Gen Z shoppers are 34% more likely to make a purchase because of a TikTok influencer than a traditional advertisement. Half of them report spending at least $100 on impulse buys driven by the platform in the last year alone. And then there's the rise of live shopping events on TikTok. A consulting firm predicts that 10 to 20% of all e-commerce will come from live commerce by 2026. That means every single scroll could become a scroll toward another unnecessary purchase. And you'd think that after getting the thing you wanted, you would at least feel good about it, but that's not always the case. Studies show it often leads to buyer's remorse. Around 25% of TikTok shoppers say they later wished they had never made the purchase at all. Now, social media may be the lie, but our bank accounts are where the truth always comes out. And the amount people are spending is pretty staggering. Right now, Americans are shouldering a record-breaking $18 trillion in household debt. That's an increase of about $170 billion in just the last 3 months alone. To put that in perspective, that's like adding the entire GDP of a country like Ukraine in just 90 days. And while a lot of that debt is from mortgages, the category that's growing the fastest is credit card debt. That is now sitting at an all-time high of $1.3 trillion. But here's the crazy part. The average credit card interest rate, or APR, is now over 24%. That is also the highest it has ever been. So if you bought something for $1,000 and only made minimum payments, it could take you years to pay it off. And in the end, you wouldn't just pay $1,240 like you might think. Instead, you'd pay closer to $1,400 because that interest compounds daily. That's the real cost of buying things to impress people who very likely finance their own posts as well. And yet, people just keep on swiping. Not because they don't get the math, but because carrying debt feels almost normal at this point. In fact, for many people, traditional credit cards aren't even the biggest problem anymore. Instead, it's the rise of buy now, pay later. Services like Klarna, Afterpay, and Affirm have exploded in popularity, especially with Gen Z and millennials. For example, in 2021, Americans spent about $2 billion using these services. By 2024, that number had skyrocketed to over $46 billion. And it's not just for large purchases. People are now financing groceries, gas, clothing, and even entertainment like concert tickets. This helps explain why it seems like everyone is doing better than you, when in reality, they're probably just financing their entire lifestyle. According to one report, about 1 in 4 buy now, pay later users have used it to purchase essential items. And here's where it gets truly risky. About 41% of people who use these services have missed at least one payment. That means millions are turning to short-term loans to afford basic needs and wants, and then are falling behind on those payments. So if you've been wondering how everyone else seems to be spending so effortlessly, the truth is they aren't. They are borrowing invisibly and often unsustainably. And part of the reason all this debt feels so crushing is because borrowing money has never been more expensive. Interest rates are at the highest levels we've seen in decades. The Federal Reserve's key interest rate is sitting between 5.25% and 5.5%, which impacts almost every corner of our financial lives. That number dictates the cost of everything from car loans to credit cards to student debt and mortgages. Car loans are now averaging between 7.5% and 9%, depending on your credit. That's just insane. And for mortgages, the standard 30-year fixed rate is hovering between 6% and 7%, which is more than double what it was just a few years ago. To put that in perspective, if you bought a $500,000 house back in 2020 with a 3% interest rate, your monthly payment would have been about $2,100. But at today's 7% rate, that exact same house would cost you over $3,300 a month. That is $1,200 more every single month for the exact same property. It's not because the house changed, it's because the cost of borrowing money changed, and this is what most people don't fully grasp. The interest rate alone can price an entire generation out of a middle-class lifestyle. So you're not necessarily making less money, you're just being charged a whole lot more for access to it. So even if you're not racking up credit card debt or financing concert tickets, just trying to do the normal things like buying a car or a home now comes with a financial penalty your parents never had to face. And all of that brings us to the biggest challenge of all, the one that feels more out of reach than ever before: buying a house. As I mentioned, back in the 1990s, the average first-time homebuyer was just 28 years old. Today, that number is 38 years old, a full decade later. And it's not just the age. The actual number of first-time buyers has plummeted. Right now, they make up only 24% of the market, which is the lowest that figure has been in over 40 years. In the last 5 years alone, the number of US cities where a starter home costs over $1 million has nearly tripled. We're not just talking about notoriously expensive places like San Francisco